there, it's your girl Z from transvoicelessons.com, and in this video we are going to talk all about the false vocal folds. We're going to talk about what they are, what they sound like, how you can control them, and how it can help you gain control of your voice. So let's get started. Part 1, Basic Information. So first off, what are the false vocal folds? Well, the false vocal folds, also called the vestibular folds, are a secondary piece of tissue that sits above your true vocal folds. It essentially forms a protective layer for your vocal folds, your trachea, and subsequently your respiratory system. Now, when someone is threatened, when someone is agitated, when somebody is in pain, these false vocal folds will collapse inwards and constrict. This interrupts the flow of air and introduces inharmonicity, or a noisy, grainy, tight kind of quality in the sound. The false vocal folds can also get out of the way, making more space for air to enter. This happens during laughter, during gasping, sometimes when people are just breathing passively, and when someone is sniffing. These two different states, constriction and retraction, have very different sounds. When constricting, the sound becomes grainy, harsh, husky, labored, tense, tight, or choked. When retracting, the sound becomes clearer, purer, lighter, more comfortable, and sounds more open. When in neutral false fold configuration, the sound is very unremarkable. It is speech-like. It is rather dull. It's regular. It's neutral. Very unremarkable, very unnotable. So we're going to be working on constriction and retraction as the sort of contrast, and we'll be able to gain control of our false folds. So why is it valuable to understand these false folds? Well, they actually convey a lot about the status of you as a speaker, how comfortable you are, how tense you are, how in pain you are. And one of the most common mistakes in voice feminization or voice alteration is the accidental constriction of the false vocal folds. It's often uncomfortable to maintain, it can cause vocal fold irritation, and it can cause vocal fatigue. It signals to the listener that you are applying effort. So if you have that false fold constriction in your voice, it's telling someone that you're exerting yourself, you're straining, you're applying labor. And it's very unusual that somebody applies labor when they're speaking. Therefore, if we are trying to sound as natural and authentic with our new voice as possible, we do not want to be constricting. Those who have undesirable constriction in their voice can remedy the problem by gaining awareness of that constriction and then applying active retraction to offset that constriction habit. Additionally, those who wish to further feminize their voice and go all the way to hyperfeminine will find great benefit by learning retraction, as it applies somewhat of a thinness boost to the voice. It makes you sound cleaner, purer, lighter, and softer. It's very gentle on the vocal folds, and it can decrease vocal fatigue. Retraction signals to a listener congeniality, receptiveness, and pleasantness. And it also has a secondary effect of lightly changing your resonance in the process. Part 2, Ear Training. Listening to constriction.
Part 1, 2.
1, 2, 3. It's very noisy. It's the opposite of being clean. Listening to retraction. 1. Ha, 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 push.
Push. This is very retracted as well. If I were to try and constrict the fold, now they're constrict. Now they're retracted.
Ha, 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 per, paw, pot. Listening to retraction 2 with voiceless sounds. Here's with neutral or constricted. Now here it is going to retraction. Here's neutral going to retraction. Listening to neutral. 1. pool, pot, as opposed to pot, part, port, pool, or opposed to part, port, pot, pool. Part 3, exploratory exercises for false fold control. All right, so we're about to do 4 basic approaches to observe and interact with false fold constriction. You might be wondering why we want to learn constriction when it's something that we don't want. Our goal in exploring constriction is to become aware of it so when or if it creeps into our sound, we can understand its influence and get rid of it. Constriction is also valuable to explore as it's an opposite to retraction. It's a foil. Constriction can come in many different qualities with different amounts of true fold engagement or lack thereof. As you explore it, you'll become more familiar with the various forms constriction can take. Constriction can be irritating, so go easy and just explore, okay? Have fun. Exercise number 1, imitating an elderly sounding voice. The fancy term for this is presbyphonic voice. As we age, typically our vocal folds stiffen a bit and a lot more false fold engagement occurs. As such, imitating very old sounding voices can be a very quick trick to get false fold constriction learned. So try to mimic some of these sounds.
Oh, you young whippersnappers. You young whippersnappers, get off my property.
Okay, so that is a very false fold constricted sound. You hear how it sounds husky, it sounds grainy, and I feel it very clearly squeezing together in this part of my body. If done correctly, you should feel this sort of heaving up and forward, this sort of constriction feeling down here. Most people report the feeling of false fold constriction as actually a bit higher up than their vocal folds. So if we feel our Adam's apple, we expect it to be a bit further up and sort of behind in that area. So listen carefully to this, imitate closely, and try to observe what you feel. All right, exercise number 2, doing a glottal tap and then trying to add constriction into it. I really like this because I feel like it makes obvious the difference between your true folds and your false folds. So we'll start with a light glottal tap, and then we'll try and engage the false folds, which will create this sound. It's a very husky, grainy kind of sound. And when we're doing that, we're sitting there tapping with our true folds, opening and closing those true folds. And when we can introduce that husky sound, we'll feel the false folds closing above the true folds. Learning how to balance between that sort of husky sound and the regular glottal sound allows us to dial in the balance between the two. So, that's pretty much almost all false fold constriction at that point. So this exercise is fantastic for sort of developing awareness of that area. Let's do it one more time. We'll feel it squeeze a little bit higher than what we're used to feeling, and it presses in, it kind of heaves upwards. So good luck with this. Listen carefully and try to mimic. Exercise number 3, squeezing an airstream. So we're going to start with a relaxed, gentle exhalation of air, somewhat like the sound H. And as we do this, we're going to try and feel us squeeze and constrict onto this airstream. The sound quality of a voiceless airstream tells us quite a lot about the configuration of the false folds. A very turbulent airstream tells us that we are constricting or engaging those false folds quite a bit. A very neutral, gentle, and almost inaudible airstream tells us that our false folds are actually retracted. So if we start neutral and then squeeze that airstream, we know that we're controlling our false folds, okay? So good luck with this exercise, have fun. Constriction exercise number 4, groaning in pain. So if we make a sound like we are in slight pain, we'll typically constrict the false folds like so. That's a lot of false fold constriction. Is a lot of true fold and false fold constriction and adduction. Or if you pretend like you're picking up a heavy weight. Or if you make a sound and pick yourself up by your arms. Hear that kind of sound? That's false fold constriction. And there is a little bit of true fold adduction going on there too. The two things are somewhat related, but we can definitely control them independently with practice. So yes, listen carefully, imitate carefully, and have fun. Try to observe what you feel. Alright, so here are 4 basic approaches to explore, observe, and interact with false fold retraction. Retraction is primarily learned as a tool for actively working against habits of constriction. However, it can also be used as an added boost to soften and clean up the sound. Retraction is subtle but very impactful. Ideally, as you explore it, you will become more familiar with the way it feels and sounds. The way airflow moves through the vocal tract during retraction often feels colder or more diffused. Many individuals describe false fold retraction as a smiling in the throat sensation, like an open throat feeling, like a spreading or a widening out down there, okay? So try and pay close attention for that sensation during all of these exercises and try and isolate that feeling. Retraction is an active effort. Just like constriction, it requires you to actively use some muscles that you normally might not be using. So try and gain awareness of those and control over those. Retraction exercise number 1, retracting on the H sound. So we're going to start here and we're going to produce a nice comfortable H. Now our goal is to try and feel that thing open up down there, and it will ultimately make our H much less audible. We'll actually feel the air diffuse, and you might even feel that it gets colder like I mentioned before. So here we go. Another way that you might do this is by starting with a slow amount of airflow, pushing a lot more airflow, but hearing less H, like so. I just emptied all my lungs out right there, but the fact that I was so retracted, there's just not enough turbulence there to really hear what's going on. Another fun way to try this is if you plug your ears with your fingers and you make an H sound and it's audible, that means that your false folds are active or neutral. If you have your ears plugged and you make an H and you can't hear it, that means that you are retracted. So for instance, if I have my ears plugged, I would be able to hear that. But if I plug my ears and I do this, I won't be able to hear that. Now, I had to use a lot of air there just to make sure you all could hear it. If you feel you found it, try and hold it and make sound. So like, ha, ha, part. Do you hear how sweet and pure that sounds? My glottal behavior is very good there, but also the retraction adds such an extra boost of clarity and purity to the sound. Incrementally work to make that H quieter, more diffused, but still pushing out air. Good luck with this. Take care. Retraction exercise number 2, silently gasping. So first, just do a very light gasp and notice how it has sound. I did it with pitch that time, but ideally, let's do an unpitched gasp. So like, now, if you can do this silently, that's going to imply that you're retracted. And if done correctly, you'll feel a very obvious opening up down here or a spreading out kind of thing. When you're experimenting with an audible versus inaudible gasp, notice if you feel any of those particular sensations of either constricting to form the very audible gasp or retracting to gain the inaudible gasp. If you feel or hear the retraction, try and hold it in that position and maybe exercise control of that muscle a little bit. Then you can try and make sound like so. Ha, ha, part, heat from fire, part. Okay, good luck with this. Good. So listen carefully, imitate closely, and best of luck. Retraction exercise number 3. Silent laughter as a trigger. Now, this is a pretty famous one, I believe first discussed by Jo Estel in her work. I have found great results with this, but it is based on how well you can genuinely pretend to do something or take on the sensation of something. Some people are better or worse at that than others, which is why I saved this for number 3. So basically what we're going to have you do is we're going to have you start in a neutral, thick starting place and then silently hold it, like so. Aw. And then I'm just going to have you hold that for a moment while I talk, okay? Imagine yourself starting to laugh genuinely. And right before the onset of sound, stop and freeze. In that freeze frame, if done correctly and honestly in a genuine laugh, most likely you're retracting your false folds. So if you do that, it can be very easy as a way to feel those false folds retracting. This exercise can be amazing for some people because since there's no sound going on, it's very easy to feel what's happening. However, for those of you who are weaker at sort of assuming character emotions or putting on like sort of sounds like that or feelings like that, it will be more difficult for you. So give this an honest try. Really think about something hilarious. I want you to genuinely feel like you're about to laugh, like so. Aw. Ha, part. And I can feel it down here, how it spreads and opens up during that thing, okay? Since you are silent and this exercise lets you focus on the feeling a lot more, if you do manage to find that thing spreading out down there like a smile in your throat, try and exercise little baby control over it. Try to maybe let go of it a hair, but then get it back to where it was and let go of it a bit and then maybe try and squeeze it even more. Try to gain control and awareness over this retraction feeling. Exercise number 4, pure mimicry. Now this exercise is great because some of you out there are just going to be able to mimic this and save yourself a lot of time. But as an exchange of that, you won't be able to gain as good of conscious control over it. So that's the trade-off for a pure mimicry approach. So let's go ahead here. I'm just going to make some false fold retracted sounds and you just try to mimic them. Ha, 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 there, fair, fall, for, face, ha, ha, part, ha. If you would like more mimicry of these false fold retracted sounds, please check the document below in the description. Best of luck. Part 4, Reflection and Recap. After critically listening, experimenting, trying, observing, and gaining some awareness of those false vocal folds, try to implement it in your speech. Be experimental, and even if you struggle to fully control them, the attempt to exercise control and awareness is how progress occurs. Experiment with all varieties of false fold control and juxtapose the control against different vocal elements such as pitch control, tongue position, larynx height, etc. to observe how they are connected. While we frame the control of the false folds as a highly isolated element, the false folds behave in tandem with the rest of the larynx. At the glottal level, all parameters are slightly related in some way. Experimentation will reveal to you how independent you can get your control and what elements they are influenced by. Now, here's a bit more theory and information about these false folds. The false folds are ultimately a tertiary vocal function, which convey less about a person's sex and gender and more about a person's physical status of relaxed, open, or tensed. That said, there is a physiological difference between the false fold mass of testosterone exposed and non-testosterone exposed voices. Unfortunately, for the purposes of voice feminization, increasing and raising R1 has a tendency to induce constriction of the false folds. Darker resonance postures often encourage more retraction, while brighter resonance postures often encourage constriction. This natural attraction towards high resonance and constriction is why it is so important and relevant to voice feminization to understand the false folds. One of the most common, if not the most common, mistakes in voice feminization is constriction of the false folds while trying to elevate resonance. This natural attraction that high resonance and false fold constriction have together is a key fundamental challenge of voice alteration. Individuals seeking feminization therefore have three primary uses for gaining awareness and control of these false folds. 1. Constriction is an extremely common mistake in voice feminization. By understanding the experience of constriction and your false folds, you will be able to avoid it. By understanding retraction, you can actively work to offset and undo that constriction. Reason number 2. Retraction offers a thinness boost to voices, which provides greater clarity, purity, and a cleaner sound, which is often reported as much more feminine. This retraction essentially allows us to mirror the neutral false fold state of non-testosterone exposed false folds. If we're thinking about the mass and we're retracting, that's going to effectively lower the mass, or at least the way the mass interacts with the airflow. Furthermore, there seems to be a boost in resonance when we retract the false folds as well, and then we end up with a smaller laryngeal space. So retraction allows us to feminize more. And reason number 3, false fold control allows for a wider variety of self-expression. Most voices naturally ebb and flow between constricted, retracted, and neutral states, depending on the context. Constriction often indicates tenseness, labor, and apprehension. Neutral communicates a lazy, casual, dull, and relaxed tone. Retraction communicates comfort, receptiveness, compassion, and positivity due to its presence during many key social interactions, such as talking to children, talking to cute animals, when you have pleasant surprise, and when you're seeing and greeting an old friend. As a result, this widens our expressive palette. So once again, 3 reasons. Constriction's a big mistake, so we got to learn how to fix it. Retraction actually allows us to sound more feminine, and learning both of them allows us to have greater expressive capabilities. So this is why we want to learn how to control the false folds. So that's all for this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you found it helpful. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please just post them down below. Please consider checking out my work on Patreon and supporting what I'm doing on that platform. If you would like to work with me in private lessons, please email transvoicelessons@gmail.com and you'll be added to our waiting pool. Of course, if you would like to check out my music, do so at the link below. And otherwise, thank you all so much for the amazing support, and I'll see you next time, okay? Bye. Cheers.